Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
The one question we didn't answer, we didn't ask, and it probably could be a whole separate discussion. Would you switch? Is there something that would compel you to switch from one to the other? And that's a really hard question. So is it really the device that's making the difference, or is it us?
Welcome, everybody, to ProductivityCast. Today, we are going to have a continuation of last week's conversation. And today we have Augusto Pinaud, Art Gelwicks, and Francis Wade. Last episode, listeners heard us debating the whole idea of smartphone productivity, choosing smartphones and the various features, both hardware and software-wise. For doing so, Art Gelwicks came up with this question at the end. So, Art, what were you thinking when you asked that question? And we're gonna have that conversation today and really discuss what it would take for us to switch sides, whether you're Apple going to Android, or if you're on the Android platform going to Apple, or even Windows phone and making the switch to Apple or otherwise. So Art, you want to give us some background there, and we'll go from there.
Okay. It was really a kind of a two-part thought. The first part was related to, if you think about how frequently we change productivity apps, most of the people who like to delve into the different applications, we change these things all the time. We're always trying the new ones. We're always trying new functionality. We're bouncing from app to app. But it's always within the same platform. So if you're an Apple user, you're always looking at the Apple versions. If you're an Android user, you're always looking at the Android versions, and so on. So what occurred to me is that what would be compelling enough about an application to make you change not applications, but actually entire platforms? If there is even something. I spent quite a bit of time since the last show thinking about this, and I can't, at least personally, find anything that would be compelling enough to make me change that entire underlying platform. So then I go to the second part, which is, what's so compelling about the platform that you're on that would keep you from making that switch? And I ask that because years ago I used to have an iPhone 4, I used to have an iPad, and I made the switch to Android, and I thought about it over the weekend, would I be able to make the switch back? And I honestly cannot find a single argument that would be compelling enough for me to make that jump back over to the Apple ecosystem. And the same thing could go the other direction if I had gone the other direction. So that's the question I'm throwing out to you guys. Thinking about your platforms that you use and the tools that you use, what would it take to make you change?
Because of work, I have in my bag an Android device because of another project that is going to use Google Docs. I consider the possibility of getting me, a more powerful Android device or a Chromebook or something on those lines. I also spend time looking at it of, okay, what will require if I said, okay, well, let's change. So the first thing will be, of course, I'm pretty invested hardware-wise, okay, into iOS. Well, that means I need to reinvest and get much of the stuff I have into Android, and that without any doubt will make the change difficult. But then I went to the scenario and say, okay, fine. Let's assume the MasterCard fairy comes to you and said, well, we're going to let you use this card and then now buy all the hardware you want. So hardware will not be an issue. Will I change? And like you, I spent a lot of time thinking on the answer to that. And I couldn't find a compelling reason either. So it's not that as we established, is more powerful or less powerful than the other one. I think that was pretty well established that it's not the case. I just think it is an argument where similar to what we had years ago about being a PC user or a Mac user. Both platforms, as we agreed, and in a certain way, surprisingly for me, both platforms has everything to be able to run one way or the other. Now it's a matter of how much you want to deal with certain things. So Android, and I think we all agree, will allow you to do a lot more customization than what iOS does. And iOS, for everything that I do, it works fine. Is there anything I want to do? I can only, and I spent time thinking, and there was only two things I would love to do that I cannot do on my iPad that I will be able to do on an Android device. But they were nice to have, not must have. I couldn't find any must have that I will say, okay, this is it, let's move on. But in the other side, on the iOS, I found a couple of apps that there is no answer at this point, at least not in the same application. I may need to change applications. And I like the apps. They work well. They do backups well. They synchronize well. Then it's hard for me to justify moving anywhere. So like you, I couldn't find any reason. But the good news is it's not a matter of capabilities. It's not, I cannot move to Android because it's less powerful or because of, it's just, I have right now, as currently set, everything on iOS, everything synchronized. And in order for me to change, I will need to spend a certain amount of time creating or figuring out how I'm going to get all those changes happen, and then how I can get all the synchronization happening again. It is possible? Yes, it is. Do I want to spend the time doing that? No, I'm happy enough with the platform I have right now.
I think I come at it with a completely different perspective, since I use almost all of these applications on all of these platforms on a regular basis. And so the idea of changing my entire platform and is actually kind of counterintuitive to me. But I'll say it from the perspective that my platform is built on primarily Google, and then these offshoots like Evernote is a big chunk of my productivity system, and Google is that other big chunk of it. You know, that's pretty much where most of my world lives. And so that moves from device to device pretty seamlessly today. I can use all of my Google products pretty much on an Android device. I can use them on an iOS device. I can use them on Windows Surface, Pro 3 with no problem. I can use them on various desktop and laptops. So it's not really an issue for me in terms of switching platforms. But going back to Art's original question, which was what would be compelling enough, would be a tool, and not that I'm supporting this, but a tool like OmniFocus 2, where I think a lot of people who are in the productivity community who want to use a tool as robust as OmniFocus 2 feel the need to switch to iOS and or Mac because it's only on those platforms. And so that's really the only thing I can see is a tool that has such a robust set of features and is so focused on, say, getting things done, the GTD methodology, that you would switch because it's going to fundamentally be your working productivity tool. I don't see many other tools like that. But I'm interested to hear others' perspective on it.
For me, I think my view of the world changed. I think, as I mentioned on an earlier episode, when I moved from Florida to live in Jamaica, what happened was that everything gadget or technology related or app related, for the most part, everything was removed from my immediate grasp. So found myself having to choose platforms, systems that were easy to repair or replicate, or where I could find a user community. Just a quick example, I'm a triathlete and I moved to Jamaica with a kind of a bicycle that only had what are called 650 size wheels, 650 centimeters or millimeter, whichever one. Can't remember. But anyway, I was the only guy in Jamaica who had these size wheels. So of course, when the time came to buy tires, inner tubes, get it repaired, it was a huge problem. So as an example, so I wouldn't pick an operating system that I couldn't either repair on my own or find someone here who could do the repair, him or herself. I wouldn't pick anything exotic. And right now, the iOS platform is a bit exotic. There's no Apple Store on the entire island. I would have to travel to actually walk into one. The repairs that are done locally, I imagine, are a bit limited. They're not expert repairs done by someone who does it every day on a regular basis. So these are the kinds of issues that lead me to want to choose the simplest solution, the one where I can do the most and replace. And in the Android system, replacing one phone with another is a no-brainer because everything is in the cloud. And it would really take a compelling case, really compelling use case, set up apps or a set of capabilities or some breakthrough device to make me go the other way and switch, because the simplest, most common solution is the one that I would always gravitate to. So I probably wouldn't switch. I don't see myself switching for a while.
It's really interesting when you think about it, because from what I've heard from everybody so far, we're really bought into how not only the applications, but the platforms and the physical tech fit into our productivity systems. And I know of the four of us, we're very evolved in how we're approaching our productivity systems. A lot of people are just at the beginning edge of that, and they're wondering, okay, which one should I choose? Should I go Apple? Should I go Android? Because if you listen to this, it's not exactly an easy switch once you've made that decision. So to modify the second part of my question, I'm going to throw this out to the group. If you had no apps loaded on your device of choice, Android or iOS, what's the one aspect of the operating system that makes you the most productive? For me, it's the sharing capability inside of Android. The ability to take any article I'm looking at, any piece of information, and share it to just about every other app on the phone is huge for me, because I do a lot of social media content curation and article curation. To be able to push content out very easily without having to go through a lot of multiple steps is just extremely compelling. When I go to the PC and sit down and do the same types of things, it's a lot more steps. It's not as convenient, and it's not as productive.
Well, you make me think about how much people laugh when the late Steve Jobs says PCs are going to be like trucks, but that's exactly what you described. And that is exactly what a lot of people is experiencing. I agree on a couple of things you said. After you pick one, it's tough to change, not impossible, but it's tough. One of the things that part of the playing and testing I did was on the Android device, mostly because it's a playing device for testing the software. I have never had really take the time to put some of my iOS stuff. So, for example, we have a family calendar that run on iCloud. So I spend time playing with that and see, if I decide to make the change, and I'm the only one changing, because that's, for me, it's a variable. Right now, everybody in my household is on iOS. So it's easy for me to also maintain one operating system, one platform, one set of applications, and so far. Will I change everybody to Android? Probably not. So So that was a factor to consider. So I said, well, let me see if I can get the calendars. And I was surprised that it required a click or two, I understand, but it was possible to get in that Android device all my iCloud calendars, to even the point that I can now use that device for scheduling meetings, thing that I had not done in the past because the calendar is not complete. So the change is possible. What will make it compelling for me to change? I don't know. That is that I could not find that answer. Everything that I seem to like to do, it's possible to do right now on iOS. So I'm not considering that, oh, well, if I can get this or that feature, it will be great. There are certain things that are coming to iOS 11 that are going to be great for the average user. One of those is the ability to share and the ability to access documents and all that. And as I was looking at that, when it was announced on WWDC, I was listening and I said, oh, that's just so cool. And then I stopped for a second and said, well, but I do that today. I have this app, and I've been doing the exact same thing they are describing for a really long time. What it's doing is bringing that ability to the masses. And you're right, again, on that art, one of the things on which is challenging is we may be on some of these things ahead of some people, mostly because we have been playing for a much, much longer time. I've been playing on this game of productivity and devices for longer than what I want to admit. One of the things that are super compelling for iOS is that simplicity. I tend to avoid these days things that will be time-sucking things for me, and the ability to have unlimited customization will be something that it will for sure put me to play in ways that I should not be playing, because I will not be working. I will be playing. So that's one of those things that I really look into the iOS as a plus, and that I understand it's my own thing. My birthday, when my birthday came early this year, my wife told me, we walk into a store, and she told me, you really like Star Wars. Why you don't buy this role-playing Star Wars game? And she wanted to buy it for my birthday. I said, no, don't buy that. And she was taken off by it. And I said, why? I don't understand. And I said, well, it's simple. If you get me that game, what is going to happen is I'm going to spend a ridiculous amount of hours that I don't have into getting good at this game, into finding who to play this game with, and all that I really can't afford right now to have that time-sucking activity in mind. And my concern with Android, from the Geeky perspective, is I will be sucked back into those things. I remember, given it was another time in my life and where I have more of that time, but I was, when Palm Pilot, talking about how old I am, released the first calendars that you have the option to have colors. They did not release that backwards. It was just forward, so for the new devices. And I'm not going to admit how many hours I spent until I was able to hack the current platform so you could install those files, so you could have all those new features. And that is my fear with Android. It's not a matter of if it's more capable or less capable than my iOS. It's going to bring me into this time vortex where I'm going to now spend 60, 80, 160 hours trying to figure it out and trying to do and customize this little thing.
I have a few comments, and maybe I'm sidestepping Art's question yet again. with my answer, but I'm gonna try and answer this without going off the rails again. But just a couple of points here. The thing that would be compelling enough for me to switch would be probably the ability to move information from mobile to tablet to the desktop environment seamlessly. And I think I'm kind of saying the same thing that you said, Art, and a little bit about what you agreed with Augusto in terms of what iOS 11 purports to be able to do. But I use a complement of applications today that I've cobbled together in order to be able to move documentation seamlessly across systems, from Google Drive to Dropbox to Pushbullet, and a number of different applications that specifically share information from one place to another. And I believe that if that was integrated into the operating system, all told, that would be enough for me to be able to switch platforms. Today, though, I don't see, even with the rollout of iOS 11 on the Apple ecosystem, that still isn't as well tied together from the AirDrop perspective. This idea that you can move an application from your phone to your desktop seamlessly. If you have legacy technology and you're running the wrong platform with Apple, that stuff doesn't work backwards compatibility wise. There's just a lot of stuff that Apple holds you back from being able to do if you're not buying the newest. They keep you in the loop for 3 versions prior. Augusto, is that what it is?
I think you're right.
Yeah. So if you have an older model iPad, those things are not going to move you forward, and I really can't be locked into the Apple ecosystem all told when it comes to being able to move cross-platform. So I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth here, right? Because I want my operating system and my mobile operating system to sort of work in tandem with one another, but I really want them to be more app-based so that I'm able to use them cross-platform. In essence, the thing that's compelling enough for me sounds like it's not quite something that's operating system related.
And if I may interject with that, and I think that's one thing that also make this, or will make towards the future, this discussion even harder. Because if we go back to 2007, so 10 years ago, the concept of the cloud, it was still a concept that it was reserved, for use a bad word, to certain people, not because it was not available, but because you require a certain technical knowledge in order to reach to it. And now the cloud is available, invisible, and basically available for everybody. What the other thing we're seeing a lot is, even that there are companies who have decided not to cross-platform their software. Most companies are cross-platform their software. So what we are going to be able to do in a future is pick those apps, change the device, and go running. And I think as that was not even a possibility 10 years ago, we are more close to the point where the platform is turning into invisible. Yes, there are 4 main operating systems: Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. And
Chrome OS.
I'm sorry?
And Chrome OS.
And Chrome OS. I tend to put Android and Chrome OS together, but because that's where Google seems to be pushing them. But
I think so.
But if you think on that, it may not be compelling right now to change one way or the other. But the reality is, if you give tomorrow an iOS device to Art and say, sorry, this is the device you can use from now on, they may think he may miss about the way they work in Android, but he will be completely functional in a couple of hours. Same thing with me. If you push me to an Android device, and I'm picking us as an example mostly because it seems like we are the strongest rooted into this. between the cloud and the appification of things, really, you can go now and move in a speed that simply wasn't possible maybe 5 years ago.
When we think about this from a productivity perspective, and we look at the platforms, and we look at this debate between Android and iOS and Chrome and Windows and everything else, I think the best guidance we can give anyone who's looking at those is decide what you need to accomplish before you look at the technology, before you start going down those paths. Because if you have an idea as to what your objectives are, then you can critically evaluate the technologies and wind up in the place that's most likely to be successful for you. If you start looking at the technologies first and say, oh, that's really cool that does that, maybe that's something I should do, you're already going down the wrong path because you're not at that point determining whether or not that meets your objectives. So that would be my recommendation to anybody. Think about what you need to do first before you start to think about how you're going to do it.
And you just heard the voice of reason instead of that he is completely right again. Okay? The problem is, from the geek on my heart, I will always start with technology and then discover, oh, I went the wrong path.
you know, there's a phrase about that, and it's do as I say, not as I do, because that is absolutely not what I do, but 90% of the time. But yeah, I'll admit it.
I think I had to learn the lesson that Art just gave the hard way, by trial and error, and realizing that because I didn't have access, I needed to figure out the simplest solution, and that was really the business need that I needed. And then I started thinking about the technology after the fact. But I was just like Augusto. I just loved the technology at first until it got me into trouble.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, guys. I think that, from a productivity perspective, it's going to take us all some deep thoughts, some sort of soul searching when it comes to the feature set, the platform, and all of the other sort of components that come into play. And I consider peripherals, accessories, those kinds of things as being sort of the complement that's necessary, sort of the magazine store of what's necessary for your arsenal to be productive. And I think that it takes some deep thought. It takes some soul searching when it comes to which parts of the puzzle you're going to put together in order to make your productivity system, all the different tools. And so this has been a great conversation for ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. Thank you for being on the show with me, Augusto Pinaud, Art Gelwicks, and Francis Wade. And here's to your productive life. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.